But what is he afraid of? He is afraid of special circumstances that could disrupt the stability maintained by the Gaussian bell curve. The stability is only possible because no special circumstances have occurred. If something unusual does happen, the bell curve collapses. So now, with everyone rushing to buy silver, does that count as a special circumstance? So why is it that everyone just isn't playing by the dealer's rules anymore? So all these long positions people are taking, especially those led by the Asian markets, the demand for physical delivery of silver has already exceeded COMEX's physical inventory. This kind of situation has happened before in history. It occurred in 1981, in January 1980 and 1981. Why? Because back then, there was no China, no Chinese investors. At that time, it was the Hunt brothers, who were the richest men in America back then. So it was just like the situation today. I want to buy silver, I'll keep buying no matter what. In the end, it forced the Federal Reserve to step in because he was extremely wealthy. He was the richest man in Texas, and he forced the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, to announce an interest rate hike. The US dollar entered a rate hiking cycle, just like today. It's just like when the Fed chair announces balance sheet reduction, raising interest rates and shrinking the balance sheet have the same effect. And he announced that he would reduce the balance sheet over the long term. In 1980, I raised interest rates for the long term. That's how I would deal with you. If I didn't, COMEX would collapse. COMEX would go under. The financing banks behind COMEX's market makers would go bankrupt. How many financing banks are there among the US silver market makers? They're all involved in it. It's those big commercial banks you see on the streets in the US. At least two of them wouldn't be able to withstand it. So they will keep fighting until the end, until you start doubting your own life. Only then can they force the short sellers to capitulate. That's what deleveraging is. They have to completely crush the leverage of the short sellers before they can keep their exchange running. Otherwise, their casino would collapse. They'd go bankrupt and pack up and leave. So, this is why silver rises later but falls first and why the drop is so severe. This is the real macro reason behind it. There might be some details like the order of events, but from a macro perspective, that's the main reason. People involved, for example, those things might change, but the main reason is still what I just said. Don't try to bring up something else, right? Like, oh, this or that. Like the silver bull market will never come back, or the gold bull market is gone for good. Come on, how can you say stuff like that? You see, after it gets knocked down and cleaned out, it rises again, right? It comes back up. Of course, gold always rises first, and then silver follows. The enthusiasm for silver, Asian investors' passion for investing in gold and silver, is like, well, it can get hard at any moment. Why? Because the US dollar can go soft at any moment. It's all relative. This is also a new problem that COMEX is facing now. Before, COMEX, yeah, they've run into this kind of problem, but the cycle in which this problem has emerged is so slow that everyone thinks it's something new. What problem is that? It's that every few decades, America's national strength faces a powerful challenge. The last time there was a major bull market in silver and gold, the weakness of the US dollar was because the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, posed a strong challenge to the United States. Yes, that was in the late 1970s and 1980s at the height of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union's national strength was on the rise. The Soviet led Warsaw Pact had military power. Its conventional military forces had actually surpassed those of the United States. And in terms of nuclear weapons, both in yield and in number, it had also surpassed the US. So at that time, the US had also been defeated in the Vietnam War, coming out battered and humiliated. Even the US presidents couldn't withstand the pressure and were forced out of office. So after the 1970s, the US dollar was actually in a very weak position. Of course, after President Reagan came to power, he managed to bring down the Soviet Union with the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as the Star Wars program. But that was a decade later. So every time the US faces a world class challenge, whenever the global order established by the US is threatened, the dollar weakens and gold becomes strong. Of course, it's always gold that strengthens first each time. And after gold becomes strong, silver thinks, I can do it too. So it rises as well, but then it gets its legs broken, completely cut down. Actually, last time, gold also got its legs broken. Yes, last time they broke gold's legs and it stayed down for 20 years. From the 1980s, its legs were broken all the way until 2004. That's when we grew up. In 2004, as we were growing up, We realized that back then in Beijing, we mentioned the China Gold White Paper. We wrote the China Gold White Paper, which basically said that gold in China was about to enter a century long bull market. What we did in 2004 was extremely what and why? Because we saw the rise of China. If China rises in the East while the West declines, if China keeps rising, then sooner or later China will become a real challenger to the United States. If everything ends up being made in China, then eventually Chinese people, especially those with money, will realize that investing in real gold and silver is more reliable than investing in US Treasury bonds. It's more trustworthy. America is actually a rogue. America is actually a rogue. In fact, actually, America is a rogue because it really is one. They use all those glamorous things from Hollywood, haha, to dress themselves up, to justify themselves. But in reality, there are a lot of very dirty things behind it, especially when you challenge America's international order, America's behavior. Well, you can't exactly call it a rogue, but it's exactly like the king of the monkeys in a monkey mountain. Or like the alpha lion in a pride, the behavior is exactly the same. When a young lion comes along and wants to challenge, or when a young male monkey grows up and wants to challenge, the old king never wins them over with virtue. America doesn't win people over with virtue. On the surface, America acts like it wins people over with virtue. Come, sit down, let's talk. But at times like this, it never relies on virtue. And now, without a doubt, America has reached that point again. In fact, today's America seems to be exactly like that, even more divided.